The Battle of Anzio, a gamble that turned into a nightmare. Before dawn on January 22, 1944, the Tyrrhenian Sea was unnaturally calm. A cold winter fog clung to the water as hundreds of Allied ships moved silently toward the Italian coastline. On board were tens of thousands of American and British soldiers packed tightly among tanks, artillery, and supplies. Ahead of them lay a quiet stretch of beach near the small coastal town of Anzio, just 30 miles south of Rome. This was meant to be a masterstroke, a bold amphibious landing behind German lines that would finally break the stalemate of the Italian campaign. Instead, it would become one of the longest, bloodiest, and most psychologically devastating battles fought by the Western Allies during the Second World War. What unfolded at Anzio was not a story of swift victory, but of hesitation, endurance, and survival under constant fire. For 4 months, soldiers would live under relentless bombardment, trapped in a narrow beachhead surrounded by enemy artillery. The Battle of Anzio became a test not of strategy alone, but of human limits. To understand why Anzio happened, and why it went so terribly wrong, we must look back to the grinding campaign that preceded it. The stalemate in Italy. After the Allied invasion of Italy in September 1943, optimism quickly gave way to frustration. German forces, under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, conducted a masterful defensive campaign. Rather than contest every mile, they withdrew methodically into the mountains south of Rome, turning the terrain itself into a weapon. The centerpiece of this defense was the Gustav Line, anchored around the ancient Benedictine monastery of Monte Cassino. Towering over the Liri Valley, Monte Cassino dominated the approaches to Rome. German engineers transformed the surrounding ridges into fortresses of concrete, steel, and interlocking fields of fire. Every Allied attack was met with devastating artillery barrages, machine gun fire, and counterattacks launched from the high ground. The winter of 1943 turned the valleys into seas of mud. Roads collapsed, vehicles bogged down, and supply lines relied increasingly on mule trains rather than trucks. Progress was measured in yards, casualties mounted by the thousands. By December, the British 8th Army and the American 5th Army were exhausted. Frostbite and trench foot incapacitated entire units. Heavy rains grounded Allied aircraft, neutralizing one of their greatest advantages. The Italian campaign had become a slow, attritional grind that threatened to bleed Allied forces dry. In London, Winston Churchill grew increasingly alarmed. Italy, he wrote, was bleeding us without moving us. Something dramatic had to be done. The birth of Operation Shingle. Churchill believed that the stalemate could be broken not by pushing harder at Monte Cassino, but by going around it. His solution was an amphibious landing deep behind German lines, close enough to Rome to threaten Kesselring's rear and force a withdrawal. The plan was codenamed Operation Shingle. The objective was deceptively simple. Allied forces would land at Anzio and nearby Nettuno, seize the surrounding terrain, and advance rapidly inland toward the Alban Hills. From there, they could cut the main German supply routes and potentially trap the German 10th Army fighting at Monte Cassino. On paper, it looked brilliant. In reality, it was a gamble. Landing craft were in short supply, most of them already earmarked for the upcoming invasion of Normandy. The force allocated to Shingle was limited. Major General John P. Lucas's U.S. 6th Corps would land with approximately 36,000 men, supported by tanks, artillery, and naval gunfire, but far fewer than planners would have preferred. Even worse, Lucas's orders were vague. He was instructed to establish a secure beachhead and threaten German communications. There was no clear directive to advance immediately toward Rome. Lucas, a cautious and methodical commander, understood the risks. If he advanced too quickly and German forces counterattacked in strength, his troops could be pushed back into the sea. Memories of the near disaster at Salerno months earlier weighed heavily on his mind. Still, the decision was made. Operation Shingle would go ahead in January 1944, in the middle of winter. The landing at Anzio. The landings began in the early hours of January 22nd. To the surprise of almost everyone involved, they were nearly flawless. German defences along the coast were thin. Thanks to effective deception and poor German intelligence, the landing caught Kesselring completely off guard. American Rangers and British commandos came ashore with minimal resistance. Within hours, the port of Anzio was secured. By the end of the first day, Allied forces had landed tens of thousands of troops, hundreds of vehicles, and vast quantities of supplies. Casualties were astonishingly low. The road to Rome appeared open. This was the moment the operation was designed for. German forces were scattered. Their reserves had not yet arrived. The Alban Hills, the key high ground dominating the region, were within reach, and yet the advance did not come. The fatal pause. General Lucas chose to consolidate rather than push inland. He ordered his men to dig in, secure the beachhead, and wait for additional supplies and reinforcements. His concern was that advancing too far, too fast, would expose his flanks and leave his forces vulnerable to counterattack. From a tactical standpoint, his caution was understandable. From a strategic standpoint, it was disastrous. Kesselring reacted with extraordinary speed. Within days, German divisions were racing toward Anzio from every direction. Panzer units, paratroopers, and infantry were rushed to the area by road and rail. The window of opportunity closed. By the end of January, the Allies at Anzio found themselves surrounded on three sides. German artillery occupied the high ground overlooking the beachhead. The terrain, a flat, marshy plain, offered almost no natural cover. What had been intended as a bold maneuver now became a trap. Hell's half acre. The German counterattacks began in earnest in early February. Shells rained down day and night. Artillery fire was constant, methodical, and terrifyingly accurate. German observers, positioned on the surrounding hills, could see nearly every Allied movement. The most feared weapon was a massive railway gun nicknamed Anzio Annie. Its enormous shells screamed overhead before slamming into the beachhead with devastating force, obliterating everything within their blast radius. Trenches flooded with rainwater and mud. Foxholes collapsed. The dead often lay unburied for days because it was too dangerous to retrieve them. Soldiers lived underground, emerging only to fight, move supplies, or evacuate the wounded. Sleep came in minutes, not hours. The constant bombardment shattered nerves and morale. Anzio was no longer a battle. It was a siege, the German counteroffensive. By early February 1944, the trap around Anzio had closed. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring had done exactly what Allied planners feared most. He had rushed reinforcements from every corner of Italy, stripping other sectors to contain the beachhead. German divisions arrived exhausted but determined, fully aware that throwing the Allies back into the sea would be both a military and psychological victory. The German plan was simple: crush the beachhead through sustained artillery fire and repeated counterattacks, then destroy what remained. From the surrounding hills, German guns dominated the flat coastal plain. Every road, supply dump, and assembly area was pre-registered. Any movement during daylight invited immediate fire. Even at night, flares turned the darkness into daylight, exposing soldiers scrambling through mud and shell holes. The Allies began to refer to the Anzio perimeter as Hell's half acre. Anzio Annie and the artillery Terror. The most feared weapon at Anzio was the massive German K5 railway gun, nicknamed Anzio Annie by Allied troops. Weighing over 80 tons, the gun fired shells that could travel nearly 40 kilometers. Each round screamed through the air before crashing down with devastating force. The explosions flattened buildings, obliterated trenches, and tore men apart without warning. The psychological impact was as destructive as the physical damage. Soldiers described the sound as something different from ordinary artillery, a deep, rising howl that froze blood before the impact even came. Hospitals, supply depots, and command posts were all targeted. Nothing felt safe. German artillery fired thousands of shells every day. Allied counter-battery fire struggled to locate guns hidden in caves, tunnels, and camouflaged positions. The Germans had turned the terrain itself into an artillery platform. For the men in the trenches, survival depended on luck as much as skill. Life inside the beachhead